So in light of Deontay Wilder losing to Joseph Parker and effectively scuppering the AJ fight, which was set to take place in March, we're now hearing that Anthony Joshua might fight Francis Ngannou in March instead. That's a fight that the Saudis are apparently very interested in. Now, Anthony Joshua is not a champion, obviously, so there's no moral or legal obligation for him to fight the best available contenders every time he steps out. However, as a boxing fan, I would prefer to see Anthony Joshua fight proven boxers rather than this MMA guy, Francis Ngannou. I know Ngannou did well against Tyson Fury, but you do get anomalies. I mean, Leon Spinks, who had just 7 fights at the time, beat reigning heavyweight champion Muhammad Ali. Ali didn't train. He totally underestimated Leon Spinks. He saw him as a novice, which he was, and he ended up losing the fight on points. In the rematch, of course, Ali completely schooled Leon Spinks. And after that, Leon Spinks went on to have a very disappointing heavyweight professional career. He turned out to be basically an Audley Harrison type fighter. He was an Olympic gold medalist, but his pro career was very, very disappointing. And he basically ended up as a journeyman. So just because Francis Ngannou did well against Tyson Fury, that doesn't automatically mean that he's one of the best heavyweights out there. It could just be one of those anomalies. These things happen particularly in heavyweight boxing. So it remains to be seen how good he actually is. Perhaps if he fights Anthony Joshua, we'll find out more about him. But from a personal perspective, as a boxing fan, I would rather see Anthony Joshua fight proven boxers. And when I say proven, I'm talking about, guys that have an extensive amount of professional fights, extensive amateur careers, and so on, not people that are just coming over from MMA. So anyway, let's have a look at some of the potential opponents for Anthony Joshua in his next bout. And look, he's had 3 comeback fights since those 2 losses to Usyk. He seems to have got his mojo back in the Otto Wallin bout. It was a good performance, barely took any punches, looked very confident, completely dominated and stopped a guy who'd given Tyson Fury a lot of trouble. So that, as far as I'm concerned, necessitates a step up in his next fight. And so let's have a look at the WBA rankings because they have been updated. So Anthony Joshua is in at number 2. Martin Bakole is number 1. Anthony Joshua versus Martin Bakole as a WBA final eliminator would be a great fight. I'd love to see that. If we have a look at the other rankings here, which haven't yet been updated, so Anthony Joshua might move up in some of them. Presumably he's going to move to number 1 with the WBC. Arslanbek Makhmudov, who's currently number 3 in the WBC, will be moving down because of the fact that he lost to Ajit Kabayel. So perhaps you could have Anthony Joshua at number 1 and Frank Sanchez at number 2. That seems likely to me, but we'll see. Anthony Joshua versus Frank Sanchez is a great fight. Apparently they had a exchange on social media, exchanging some words. Yeah, let's see that fight. AJ versus Frank Sanchez as a final eliminator. Already talked about the WBA. With the IBF, Anthony Joshua will be number 2 because he just beat Otto Wallin, who was previously number 2. Hrgovic is obviously number 1. We could see Anthony Joshua versus Filip Hrgovic either in a final eliminator, but that's probably not likely because Hrgovic has fought several eliminators at this point. I don't think he wants to fight anymore. I think the next fight he wants to be for the title because he's been waiting for his IBF shot for a very long time. So we could see Anthony Joshua versus Filip Hrgovic for the vacant IBF belt if it becomes available following the first fight between Alexander Usyk and Tyson Fury. If that bout goes ahead, I think it will go ahead. There's some people saying they don't believe the fight will happen. They're questioning it because of the fact that the undercard hasn't been announced and obviously Fury's track record, so on and so forth. I'll come on to that in a separate video. But yeah, so AJ versus Hrgovic is a potential fight. And then with the WBO, you've got the potential for Anthony Joshua to fight Zhilei Zhang, who is the interim champion with the WBO. So all of these are great fights, just in terms of, the matchups, entertainment value, and in terms of Anthony Joshua's next step up. He wants to become a 3-time heavyweight champion, and any of the fights I just mentioned will get him closer to that. The fastest route, it would seem, would be the IBF, if he can get in there and fight for the vacant belt against Filip Hrgovic. The others would involve, as I say, final eliminators. And if he wins the final eliminator, then he'll get a shot at one of the belts. A name I haven't mentioned is Joseph Parker. He isn't as highly ranked as Anthony Joshua yet, but again, in the updated rankings, you never know. He might leapfrog Anthony Joshua in some of them. Bear in mind, with the WBA, Deontay Wilder was previously ranked at number 1. After his loss to Joseph Parker, he's dropped out of the WBA rankings completely. Like, he's not in there at all. So he's gone from being number 1 to being not even in the top 15, which is pretty extraordinary. We'll see what happens with Joseph Parker and how far he goes up. But one of the reasons I'm not particularly interested in Anthony Joshua, Joseph Parker is because we've seen it before. I know it was a very long time ago, and if rematches are to happen and there was no controversy in the first fight, then I like a certain amount of time to elapse before we see the rematch. And certainly several years have elapsed since their first fight. But the first fight was so god-awful between AJ and Joseph Parker. The styles didn't gel. The referee wouldn't let, I say Parker work on the inside, but he wouldn't let either of them work on the inside, really. But that seemed to benefit Anthony Joshua, who was controlling things on the outside. So if there was a better referee in a rematch between the two, would it be a more exciting fight? Potentially. And obviously they're more mature now, both fighters. They know a lot more, they're more experienced and so on. So it might be a better fight, but again, the memory of that first fight is still lingering in my mind, and I'm sure in the minds of many boxing fans. I don't think a lot of people are going to be clamoring to see AJ versus Joseph Parker 2. And we haven't seen Anthony Joshua versus Frank Sanchez. We haven't seen Anthony Joshua versus Martin Bakole or Filip Hrgović or Jared Anderson or Zhilei Zhang. So because we haven't seen those fights, I personally would rather see those before we see a Joseph Parker fight. And I'll talk about what's next for Joseph Parker in a separate video. But yeah, I'll leave it there. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below about Anthony Joshua's best move. How do you think he would fare against any of these guys? Personally, I think the most difficult fights for Anthony Joshua would be, I want to say, Martin Bakole, and this is based on recent form. Martin Bakole, Zhilei Zhang, Frank Sanchez. Hrgović on recent form might be the easiest. Not like it's an easy fight per se, but out of the names I just mentioned, it might be the easiest of the names mentioned. Frank Sanchez might be the most difficult because he's mobile, he's tricky, he walks you onto shots, he's very patient in the ring, he's not the easiest guy to hit. So I think Frank Sanchez might be the most difficult at the moment, but that's subject to change as we find out more about Frank Sanchez. So yeah, I'll leave it there. Are you sick and tired of the mainstream mindset? Does the dogmatic conformity and pathological ignorance have you tearing your hair out in frustration? Then don't be alone. Come and join our brotherhood on Patreon. We stand as a beacon of reason against an army of insanity. You'll gain access to my weekly topical podcast where we take more deep dives than Jacques Cousteau on an endless variety of subjects. There's also videos, interviews, live Q&As, as well as a vast back catalogue of previous episodes, including my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. You can listen via the Patreon app or download in high-quality MP3. Connect with myself and hundreds of other members in our Element chat group. There's no contract, no commitment, you can cancel at any time, and it's cheaper than a Mickey D's McMuffin. Just head to my Patreon page via the link below this video and select the tier called the Brotherhood of Reason. I'll see you over there.